welcome to the Sunday Morning Cornerman. On this episode of the SMC, we'll discuss all the relevant fights of UFC on ESPN Plus 13, the Randamie versus Ladd. I will do all of this with the senior editor of Sherdog.com. He's the great Ben Duffy. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm ready to break down this card with you. Very excited.
Let's do it. Ben, the UFC rolled into the Big Tomato? What? You didn't know Sacramento was called the Big Tomato? Of course you didn't. Who the hell does? I Googled it, and here we are. You know what? Let's come correct. Ben, the UFC rolled into Sac Town for the 6th time, but it's been a minute. To give you an idea how long ago was the last time they went to the Golden State's capital, the main event saw Michelle Waterson choking out Paige Van Zandt. Also on the card was Mickey Gall choking out Sage Northcutt. Urijah Faber defeated Brad Pickett. And on the prelims, Colby Covington beat Brian Barberena. Ben, this is the part of the show where I typically ask Keith going into this card what he thought about this card on paper. So I'll pose the question to you since you're the Keith of the week. What'd you think about this card going in? What'd you think about it on paper?
Even on paper, I thought this one was a pretty weak card by the standards of UFC Fight Night. There were some individual fighters I was interested in seeing perform. The fight at the top of the card, Randamie versus Ladd, that I'm sure we'll break down in a minute, was very interesting to me, but not a whole lot of meat on this one. Like in terms of interesting, divisionally relevant matchups that also promised action. Like, weak card on paper.
I'm with you. All right, let's get to the main event. Ben, Germaine de Randamie has quite a history. First, she defeated women's MMA icon Holly Holm to inaugurate the featherweight belt. Then she doesn't want to fight featherweight boogeyman. Do you say boogeyman when it's a woman? Boogie person? It's either here nor there.
we have a definitive answer on that one because Joanna Jędrzejczyk told us, I'm the boogie woman.
The boogie woman.
So we know it is a gendered term. You can be the boogie
there you
woman.
go. So she didn't want to fight the boogie woman, Chris Cyborg. So she stripped. Then she comes back to bantamweight. Her first opponent, Raquel Pennington, misses weight. She wins, and instead of giving her the UFC giving her a title shot like they gave Pennington, who she had just defeated, she finds herself on this card. She fights in a main event against a girl with a ton of promise who is undefeated, but previous to tonight had never fought on the main card, never mind the main event. So with all this dysfunction in Germaine de Randamie's history, who the hell knew what we would get? Well, Ben, we got a one-punch quick stoppage. For starters, what did you think of the stoppage?
In the moment, it certainly looked early to me. And anytime there's like a flash one-punch knockout and then you see some flailing and the ref jumps in, I mean, I always want to see it replay a couple times because sometimes they see something that I or the cameras don't. Like, they can catch that moment that somebody's eyes are just gone. You know, there have been times when I thought a stoppage was too soon. You know, I watched the replay and I was wrong. I've watched this one on replay a few times just through the various GIFs that have come out. I'm not seeing it yet. I think Herb Dean blew this one.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed quick. Ladd, I mean, for her part in the post-fight, seemed kind of like, what are you going to do? I'm not a ref. And she's young. I mean, that's how she's going to react. She's not going to blast a guy like Herb Dean, and you got to kind of respect her for that. So, for me, I don't know, man. It seemed like a weird night with stoppages, and we'll get to some of that stuff after that. I mean, all we can really do, the funny part about arguing stoppages is in the end, what can you really change about it? You can get upset about it. You can say that maybe it should have lasted longer. Maybe the person who was the person who lost out in the early stoppage, you can argue for their rematch, but in the end, you're left with what it was. So let's move on. What do you think is next for Germaine de Randamie? I mean, it seems like Amanda Nunes makes sense. If that's the fight, what weight should it be at? For what belt should it be for? If not, what do you want to see?
Well, I think the UFC is going to do everything they possibly can to deny her a title shot. And I'm not even blaming them for that because, I mean, she has already won a title and walked away to go back and be a cop in Utrecht. Marked it off her bucket list and said, I'm not fighting Cyborg, I'm going. I mean, it's the reason they didn't give her a title shot already. That they don't want that to happen again. It's the reason they put Ladd in front of her. I think they thought Ladd was going to run right through her, and that didn't happen. I think she deserves a title shot next, just based on the merits of what she's done in the cage. And I think the one that would make the most sense would be Nunes at 135. That's where most of Randamie's achievements are. Even though she won the title at 145. So, that's the one that makes the most sense to me. I don't know if they'll do it.
I'm with you. Let's talk about Jermaine Randamie just for a second, because I don't really know what to make of her. And I don't say that in any way disparagingly. I'm going to say some things here that are kind of borderline in terms of me saying that I don't mean this disparagingly. She's just kind of funky for me, man. She's kind of like, she's weird at times. She doesn't really fit the bill. And maybe that's why the UFC is kind of hesitant in really moving her forward. I mean, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Do you get the kind of, maybe there's a lack of marketability with her? Something seems off. Do you understand what I'm saying? Is that a fair reason to deny somebody a title shot? Kind of makes sense of all this nonsense that I'm talking.
Okay, I definitely feel you that there's something off about her and something that is holding her back from being promoted to the full. Fairness doesn't really enter into this until title shots are determined by third-party sanctioning bodies. There is no fairness. It's whoever the UFC thinks they can sell us on a title shot. Randamie is a fantastic fighter. Who she lost to in her career? She's lost to Amanda Nunes, Julia Budd, and in her very first fight, she lost to Vanessa Porto. At worst, all three of those women are top 10 in their respective divisions, and I think Randamie would win a rematch with Porto, and probably would have any time in the last 5 years. In the cage, she is fantastic. The question has always been her level of commitment to this sport. If you look at her record, she's on a 5-fight win streak, but those 5 fights are spread out over 5 years. She's not promotable in the way the UFC usually finds women to promote. She's not a complete destroyer, and she's not conventionally hot. And those are the two things that the UFC knows how to sell as far as women go. Other than that, she's a really interesting person, speaks fantastic English. She's got a delightful personality. She has things they could sell if they wanted to, but it would be trickier.
Yeah, I agree. I think that her and Amanda Nunes is like this this trilogy fight that we should get. That those two women could put on 3 great fights if you just sort of steer them into each other. But I think the UFC kind of looks at it like, well, what are we going to do here? No matter who wins, we really can't market either or. Which I did some writing last week about how Amanda Nunes should be marketed much better. So I disagree with that, and I think. I've actually taken umbrage with a lot of people just about the fact that everybody's marketable, right? You just have to figure out how. So you can't really blame someone for being. Everybody has their quirks. They have their moments that they're with their family or with their friends. You just have to find out the right way to market them. Either they're a destroyer or whatever.
George St. Pierre is arguably the biggest superstar this sport has ever generated. Worst case, he's in the top 3. And he was a bland interview on the mic. And he was a decision machine in the cage, and it didn't matter. You know what I mean? Anybody can become a superstar if handled properly.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's move on, Ben. Urijah Faber is a Hall of Famer, former champion, icon of the sport, and Ricky Simón is an up-and-coming killer with a complete skill set and a bright future. Faber bit off more than he can chew in this one, and his ass needs to just stay retired. That's what the pundits will tell you, Ben. That's what the fans who aren't Urijah Faber stans will tell you, but not so fast. Simón came in there looking to stalk and take out a legend and didn't realize the old gunslinger had at least one more gunfight left in him. Faber was quicker on the draw. Then Simón borrowed his teammate's overhand right, dropped Simón, and then finished on the floor. Ben, this was an upset, not a huge upset because Urijah Faber's a Hall of Famer, but a shocker to be sure. So let's kind of break down the recipe for this. Do you think Urijah Faber still has it, or did Simón sleep on him?
A little bit of both. Urijah Faber still absolutely has something. He's 40, which, 40's not young, but he is a spectacularly conditioned athlete. You saw when he walked to the cage. He looked exactly the same he did at 30, exactly the same as he did at 35, 28. He's never let himself go. So in terms of physical tools, I'm sure he's lost a tiny tick of a step, but he looked amazing. I don't know if Simón slept on him. I think, and I'm saying this as somebody who picked Simón to win this fight and has egg all over his face, as does 91% of the Sherdog Pick'em League. He exposed flaws in Simón's game. Like, he made Simón pay for dropping that left hand in a way that nobody else has been able to do. I mean, fair play to Urijah. He looked fantastic, and if coming back, I figured he would immediately be kind of a top 20 guy in those divisions, just based on where he'd been before, but maybe he's still in the top 10. Who knows?
Yeah, it gets interesting for me because of some of the stuff, I'm a believer that, when Dana likes you and you're kind of in the, whatever you want to call it, you're one of his guys, then you're going to be privy to some things. So I think that, especially when you're like a champion and he likes you, or you have a relationship with him, and I think a little bit, maybe Urijah saw this coming, maybe Henry Cejudo saw this coming, when we were like, why is Henry Cejudo calling out Urijah Faber? Maybe they knew that there was some writing on the wall that we didn't know about. So here's my question for you. In the post-fight, Faber was calling Triple C, Henry Cejudo's name. I'll ask this question simply. Faber had a good night, but is he ready for that Cejudo smoke?
Nope, he is not. I think Cejudo is on the top of his game right now, certainly, and he's at the top of our game. Like, in terms of pound for pound performers, what they're doing right now, Cejudo has looked absolutely sensational in the past year, and I don't know if I would take the best Urijah Faber ever over how Cejudo is fighting right now at 135. I'm not sure I would, but the Faber of 2019, no, he does not want that smoke.
Yeah, and it's weird, we sometimes have short memories. We go to UFC Hall of Fame inductions, and I was there when Urijah got inducted, and we kind of remember who the guys were, but, Faber was a killer in the WEC, never quite got the gold, never quite realized what he was in WEC and in the UFC, and like you said, Henry Cejudo, for all his cringiness, is doing stuff that people have never done before. I mean, he's got a legitimate shot at, maybe depending on what happens with Holloway and Edgar, he's got a legitimate shot at maybe holding 3 belts, should he choose to. And I just, I'm with you. I think that sometimes you can only script a perfect ending so many times. And this is about as perfect as it's going to get for Urijah. I don't know that he should have put his gloves in the cage because he came out of retirement for this fight. So it's kind of odd to be like, I'm coming out of retirement and then I'm laying my gloves back down. It's kind of weird. It'd be a weird play. I kind of get where he's coming from in the way that he did this, but I think that he needs to make his next move very carefully. And I think that Henry Cejudo is not a careful move. So
it's definitely not a careful move. I mean, it really depends on what he wants. If he wanted to, he could stick around the UFC for 2 more years, fight 4 or 5 more times against beatable bantamweight or featherweight competition and pick up some paychecks. But I don't know if that's what's in Urijah Faber's DNA. I don't think it's in his DNA to just settle into being just another guy. I mean, right up until the moment he retired when he basically decided he wasn't going to win another belt. He'd given it, was it 4 title shots he had in the UFC?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, 3 or 4 title shots in the UFC, and finally was like, okay, I'm not going to win another belt. He retired because he didn't want to settle into being just another guy. So it'll depend on what he wants.
I agree. All right, let's move on. Let's get back to the main card. Ben, every once in a while, we get a fight that comes together seemingly at the perfect time when both fighters are surging. Last time out for Sacramento's Josh Emmett, he knocked 145-pound gatekeeper Michael Johnson stiff. His opponent, Mirsad Bektic, won a split decision over Ricardo Lamas. Lamas is a common opponent for these two, but Emmett knocked him out. This fight on paper is total aggression, coming forward and swinging for the fences. When they got in the cage, what we got was just that. The fight was super tense throughout with both men swinging for the bleachers, but it was Emmett who landed a stiff jab and followed it up with ground strikes to finish Bektic. Ben, first, what did you think of the stoppage? I mean, obviously, it's nothing compared to the stoppage that we got in the main event, but did you feel comfortable with the stoppage? I'm personally, before you go, I'm of 2 minds. Obviously, Bektic didn't argue it, and wasn't really defending himself, but I didn't really see the shots that would have made me feel like, okay, like super good with the stoppage. Were you super good with the stoppage?
I wasn't super good with the stoppage, and when there's an iffy stoppage, I'm usually of the school that would have liked to see another 3 to 5 seconds, another couple shots just to make sure that it was going the way we thought it was going. Having said that, I don't hate this one because anytime there's a stoppage that's somewhat iffy or controversial, my whole thought is, okay, what was going to happen in the next 3 to 5 seconds? Was the referee, robbing the losing fighter of a chance to come back, like a plausible chance to come back, or was he just robbing him of 2 or 3 more undefended shots to the face? So I don't hate this one. I would have been fine if it went a little longer, but I don't think that we were robbed of the chance of seeing like Mirsad Bektic, pull off this amazing comeback. I think that one was done.
All right, let's move on to what's next for Emmett. He came into the fight ranked 9th, which typically means you're about 2 fights, not counting this one tonight from a title shot. When you watch him fight, and again, we're dealing with nowadays in this world of the UFC that we live in, we're dealing with how marketable we think a fighter is. And is he someone we want to go contend for a title and all these other sort of stipulations that are not whether or not he's deserving of it, which is fine. I mean, now I understand the business that we're in. We get it. But when you look at him, does he seem like a guy who's sort of on the precipice of a belt, or at the very least a title shot, or a contender shot? Or does he just seem like a guy with, like Jeremy Stephens, who's got big hands and has good nights?
I think he's in a better spot than Stephens, just because Stephens would always kind of like lose a fight and send himself back to the back of the line. Like Emmett's putting together a nice little run here. The problem with featherweight is it was already a really crowded top 10, and that was before, Holloway got some multi-divisional ambitions. So in a lot of divisions, he would be 1 fight away, just in terms of how the picture of contention is playing out and how many people are in line ahead of him who either just came off a win in a higher level fight or already have one booked. He may be 2 fights away, and let's hope he keeps winning, Yeah,
I mean, I guess we'll get to this later, but I'll say this briefly, and then, Emmett is what he is, and you kind of touched on it as far as what he has to do to keep himself relevant. But it was a good night for alpha male. It was is it about as good? We'll get to that later, but it felt good. Like he was sort of the guy that sort of brought it all together, and then when Urijah did, it just sort of like was like the icing on the cake for that team. All right, let's move on. Ben, last time Karl Roberson was in the octagon, he drew Brazilian legend Glover Teixeira, and he got finished in the first. This time he fought a slightly lesser-known Brazilian in Wellington, Turman, who, if I'm being candid, sounds like he has a trust fund and wears sweaters tied around his neck. That's not how he fought on this evening.
Nope.
But the stand-up was definitely Roberson's, but Turman was sharp in the grappling, finding some top position in both rounds 2 and 3. Roberson found his way out of several bad positions and found his way to a split decision victory. The fight was one of those fights where it's like, a tale of the ground and the feet. Roberson was winning on the feet, Turman winning on the ground. Ben, how'd you score this fight, and what do you think we have in Roberson at this point?
All right. For one, I think the decision was bunk. I think it might be the worst judge's decision on the night. I had it 29-28 for Wellington, but the thing is, it could plausibly have been scored 30-27 for him. Like, I gave Roberson the first round. I think that's the only round that was really close in my book as I was kind of watching. But this was not a great decision. I picked Roberson really based on him just being the more known quantity to me. It's not often somebody comes into the UFC and I haven't seen anything on him. And in Wellington Turman, I did not have the chance to watch any tape on him. So even in like the Sherdog Pick'em League, I went with Roberson just as the fighter I knew more about. I think Roberson's ceiling, unless he really retools his game, is in that kind of 11 to 20 batch. I don't know if he's a future top 10 guy. And I still think that's what we have in him. He's got some deficiencies. He ran out of gas first, for sure. He didn't really have much answer for what was going on the ground. And he's a fairly inexperienced fighter in terms of record. He doesn't have a long amateur career. He's is he now 8-2 as a pro? I think he went in 7-2.
Yeah, that's right.
So I mean, I think Karl Roberson might be just another guy, like just another good guy, but I don't see anything from him so far that makes me think future title contender.
Yeah, there's certain guys, and I mean, there's obviously roads that you can go down with these discussions, and Keith and I kind of take some of these abstract discussions here and there and just talk about MMA at large and what we're looking at in a sense. But Roberson's one of those guys who, when you look at him, you sort of project onto him certain skills, certain things that you expect of him, or in all sports, particularly in MMA, we have this way of sort of saying that, athleticism, quote unquote, for whatever that means, is like the ultimate ticket to superstardom. And sometimes we give these guys a little bit more of credit, whoever they are, because, they look, they got the body, they got the look, and we're like, okay, this guy could be the next fill in the blank. Did you think that, I don't know if that moves its way to judges. And I don't know if sometimes when you see a guy who's doing things, like I can see what a judge may have seen in Roberson's performance, but I agree more with yours. So does anything that I'm saying make any sense, or am I completely rambling and all of this is just some kind of philosophical bullshit that's in no way grounded in reality?
Well, I'm very familiar with the black explosive dynamic when it comes to the way fans and even judges and media view fights. I don't know if that's the case with Roberson. I think it's just kind of the de facto we're going to see things in favor of the guy that we know about until it's conclusively proven otherwise. If you've got a fighter that's been in the UFC a few times versus a guy that's new, everywhere from the commentary booth down to the judges, there's a little bit of prove it, directed at the new guy. And I thought Turman proved it, but apparently the judges didn't.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, and you kind of, in the way that I presented it, sort of hit on what I was talking about. But I guess another way that I could have put it was, do we sometimes look at a guy and make him what we want him to be, what we think he'll be, or whatever, any guy, where we're just like, okay, this is what I think he'll be, and then we sort of just say, the benefit of, and it's a perfect transition to our next fight, which is when Marvin Vettori, and we're going to start the discussion on the Marvin Vettori fight by talking about when he fought Israel Adesanya. So let's talk about that. Ben, Marvin Vettori's claim to fame is that he may have defeated stylebender Israel Adesanya. So much has happened for Adesanya since that fight that it's hard to believe that Vettori hasn't been in the cage since that fight. Vettori lost some time due to popping for USADA based on a contaminated supplement. His opponent on Saturday night has also not been in the octagon since 2018, an injury to his knee keeping his feet off the canvas. Both these boys like to stand and throw, so we knew coming in we were probably going to get an action fight, and that's what we got. It was Vettori's fight throughout, working some pretty straightforward combinations and just short of being first for most of the fight. Mutante had some moments. He just didn't look as sharp as we've seen him in the past. Listen, and I touched on this at the beginning, Ben. It's really unfair for me to link Vettori to Adesanya. It's unfair to Vettori, especially. But they did have a close fight. Mm-hmm. So the question is, did Adesanya just go into warp speed and just zip away from the Italian dream after their fight? Or do you think we have something in Vettori? Do you think that there's something there, or do you think that it was just a bad night for Adesanya in the same way that Anthony Pettis had a bad night against Clay Guida, and it's not really it doesn't define him?
I believe in Vettori. I think to the extent that we've seen from him so far, I think he's the truth. And I mean, this is going to be horrible and probably get, me a little bit of hate mail. But, when I see a European prospect, I kind of judge their future in the UFC by how American they fight. Do they have any wrestling at all? How are they at delivering forward pressure on the feet and dealing with it? Vettori is one of the most American fighting continental European, guys in the game. I think he's solid. I think Adesanya has probably improved more in the time since they fought, but I think he'd probably still give him a solid fight. Like I did think Adesanya won their fight, but he's probably given him a harder time than anybody other than Gastelum, and maybe even including Gastelum.
In the post-fight, he called out Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa's obviously booked. But what do you think about that fight in the sense that, do you think that it made sense for him to call out Paulo Costa? I mean, you always got to kind of shoot up. I mean, if you had a good fight against Adesanya and he's fighting for belts, it's not unreasonable, right? It's not that unreasonable to call out Paulo Costa. What do you think his chances would be against Paulo Costa?
Well, I mean, shooting up is an unfortunate choice of words for somebody who just sat out a year for a doping violation. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely him shooting for the moon. He's not in that conversation yet. Some realistic next steps for him. I mean, Roberson just barely won on the same card. But other middleweights in his same kind of general conversation that have just won, Edmund Shabazian won last weekend. I think that'd be a hell of a fight. I don't think the UFC is going to give him Darren Wynn, who won, was it 2 weeks ago? I think they're probably going to kind of keep Wynn a little closer to the vest for the moment. Or in another week or two, we got Barrio and Krzysztof Jotko fighting. The winner of that would be a really good next step for Vettori. But I think Vettori is one solid win away from being like right on the cusp of the top 10. I do like him a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I don't know if I like him more. I don't really know where I stand with the kid. I mean, I liked him tonight. And listen, I was in the Mutante camp for a while. There was a couple of fights there where I was like, this guy's coming and he's going to start going for belts. And I think that I thought Mutante was going to be what I guess Paulo Costa ended up being. Like I thought that was where he was heading.
I mean, I don't want to, overthink this or psychoanalyze too much, but when you know that Cezar Ferreira came up like literally like sleeping on Vitor Belfort's couch and just basically being Vitor's all but adopted son, it makes perfect sense. He is like mini Vitor. He's incredibly gifted when he's on. I mean, his list of victims, I mean, aside from Roberson, who just, won tonight, Nate Marquardt, Jack Hermanson, Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos. Like, where are those three guys in their respective divisions right now? And Mutancha's beaten all of them. But then he's lost some horrible fights too. And the thing is, he was on tonight. He fought pretty well, just he wasn't enough. It wasn't some weird fight where he got dinged early on and just kind of wilted and went away, which we've seen him do. Vettori beat a good version of Cezar Ferreira. So it was a good look for him tonight.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's move on to the prelims. Before we do that, talk to me about the main card. Did you like it? It was more than you expected it to be? Was it less? What'd you get out of the main card?
It was less, and that's saying a lot because, as I said off the top, I wasn't expecting too much out of it. The finishes that were spectacular were iffy. There wasn't any truly great fight on the whole main card. So, yeah, it was just kind of a dud, just another card, and we'll move on and see what we've got next week.
All right, let's hit the prelims. So the first fight, the last fight of the prelims, the first one we're going to discuss is John Allan defeated Mike Rodriguez by unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, 30-27. I like this fight. I thought it was solid. I saw more bursts out of Mike Rodriguez, but more solid fighting out of John Allan. What did you see in this one?
I saw pretty much the same. I agreed with the decision. This must be the night of Brazilian fighters with American or British sounding names, apparently. But yeah, I had it for Allan. I thought Rodriguez seemed to fade gas-wise later on. He was effective in bursts, but I agreed with the decision, and they will just kind of go on in whichever direction they go from here.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see these guys are and I want to kind of discuss this as well with you now. I guess as good a time as any. When you look at this card, and the UFC is kind of having a habit of doing this, and maybe this is better saved for later. I think it's actually one of my not for nothings, but they're starting to stagger these cards in a way that I would imagine is to keep your attention throughout, but it makes it like some weird fights or above some fights that may seem like they're more compelling. Typically, it was like, worst fight was the first fight of the night, and the best fight was the last fight of the night. And they don't really do that anymore. And this was sort of indicative of that. There were some fights that came on before them that that seemed more compelling. Have you seen that trend? Am I talking out of my ass here, or do you think what do you think the reason for that is?
Well, usually there is a reason for it. That was the weird thing about tonight, because I mean, the UFC has gone to kind of non-intuitive bout order over the last X number of years, just because they were going out over multiple platforms. So in 2012, they needed a fight with a little bit more sizzle to be like the Facebook headliner, or the Fox Sports 1 headliner, or what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they'd have to stack them kind of weird because they were going out over like 3 different platforms in the same evening. But tonight, everything was on ESPN Plus, at least in the United States. So there was no reason not to just kind of lay the card out in a logical order. But nonetheless, yeah, they kind of laid everything out kind of weirdly. There were some duds higher up on the card that didn't have much divisional relevance and ended up being kind of lame fights for no apparent reason.
Well, Chael Sonnen, I mean, he, depending on how closely you're paying attention, if you can sift through some of the stuff, he can really drop some pearls on you here and there. And one thing that he said is the way that they used to, this pre-ESPN deal, but one thing he said is that the way they used to set it up was like if you were the main event of FS1 or you were the main event of whatever, and that's kind of, that to me made a little bit more sense. Like you said, with it all being on ESPN Plus tonight, it seemed a little odd that they were all kind of weirdly stacked. So with that being said, let's move on to the next fight. Andre Fili defeated Sheymon Moraes by KO. Very first round, 307 of it. I was expecting more of this fight, but at the same time, because I covered Moraes when he was in World Series of Fighting, it's one of those fights where you expect it to be a war, but then both guys have the potential of ending it. So I wasn't super surprised. Maybe I was a little surprised that Fili got him that early. But what'd you think about this fight?
I loved the fight while it lasted. I mean, off the cuff, it might have been my favorite fight of the night for all 3 minutes that it went. I did not expect it to end like it did or as soon as it did. I was leaning slightly in the direction of Fili, but I thought Moraes was much more of a live player in this. When I see two fighters, matched up with each other that are both strikers by nature, and one of them is a wild man and one of them has a little bit more of a schooled game, a little bit more maybe of a traditional background, I always brace myself for the wilder fighter to just get completely pieced up. It's a lesson I learned for the last time all the way back when Krokop destroyed Vanderlei Silva for the last time. And so I carry a little bit of that with me in every fight. I thought Fili was going to win this one. I didn't think he was going to win it this easily. But yeah, spectacular. Good stuff. And always makes me happy to see Fili win. He's
one of those kids that we sort of seem to think, all right, he could go on a run here. He could maybe have a promising career, and then he finds the banana peel here and there. What do you think about this kid? I mean, do you think that he has because occasionally Keith and I'll project out people to insane levels based on where they are. Could you ever see this kid with gold around his waist? Top 10? What do you think his ceiling is?
He's so young. Well, when I say so young, at 29, he is so young for a dude with as many fights as he has. In the Sherdog Fight Finder, he has like 25 or 26 fights, and he probably has more than that because, he came up, I believe he came up fighting at the Tachi, which means he probably has a couple more fights than that in like the parking lot. But so, 5 years ago, I would have said the guy had hit his ceiling, and he's well beyond that. Because of that, I can't write him off. He feels like a younger fighter than he is, which means he's still learning. He's still willing to adjust his game. He does have a more sophisticated striking game than he did a few years ago. Moving to Team Alpha Male has been a fantastic decision for him. I have a hard time seeing his way to a belt, but I could see him getting to a title shot just by the right kind of confluence of circumstances. somebody gets injured ahead of him or other people are busy, he's on a little bit of a hot streak and he slots into one. But at worst, I think he's on his way to the top 10 and maybe we'll stake out some territory there for a while.
Let's talk about this next fight through this filter. Keith and I often talk about how it seems like they're putting really good female fights on the prelims and sort of burying them, and we can't seem to figure out why. Like, it seems like every card has this one fight where you're saying to yourself, why the hell is this fight on the prelims? One, do you have any insight in that? And I'll just tell you, we'll just talk real quickly about the fight, which was Julianna Peña, after having been gone for over 2 years, 896-day layoff, defeated Nicco Montaño by unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, 29-27. Talk to me real quick, and we'll get to the fight here in a second. But do you notice that trend, or am I just is it just kind of?
No, I completely noticed that trend. Not to drag this conversation away from the UFC, but just a quick side note. Bellator 224 last night had Arlene Blencow and Amanda Bell, who are Sherdog's number 4 and number 9 women's featherweights, not just in the prelims, but the 4th fight of the night on a 12-fight prelim card, like just completely buried. So at least it's not just the UFC. But no, I've definitely noticed that. This fight was, I was impressed with Montaño even in the losing effort. I've really, really been low on her. Probably not giving her the respect she deserves. I mean, she's certainly the most disrespected champion in UFC history, but she looked better than I've seen her look in any other fight, even any of her wins. You know, she put up a better performance against a better fighter than any of her other fights to date.
Here's an odd question: who has more equity with the UFC, Nicco Montaño or Jermaine Randamie? Like, who do you think they think they like more?
What? I was asked on a guest appearance on a podcast. Actually, I don't even know if it's a guest appearance or if it's my own show. They start to run together. But I was asked who was more likely ever to, wear a belt again or get back to a title shot. It's Randamie by far. I mean, Montaño looked good tonight, but the difference is still that Randamie is a very, very good fighter. Most of her question marks are outside of the cage, whereas Montaño hasn't proven all that much. I mean, I would have argued before tonight that if not for kind of the weird setup of the Ultimate Fighter where, you fight 3 times in 6 weeks, she might never have cracked the top 10 through like the normal ladder of contention. She looked better tonight, but again, she lost.
So let's talk about this fight. And I don't want to I hate when sometimes I do this thing where I project onto a normal fight something that I saw in a championship fight. But the fact that Montaño's had a belt around her waist, the fact that Julianna Peña is a high-level girl, this fight reminded me of the Cejudo fight we just saw, in the sense that it seemed in the first round that it was all Montaño. Now, my question to you is that Peña's rust? Is that the game plan changed? Like, in what way should I be giving Peña her full due here? That she overcame a disappointing first round, or that she was just rusty and then she said, "Oh, that's right, I'm Julianna Peña and she's Nicco Montaño, and let's get this thing straightened out." Which one do you think is closer to what actually happened?
This is going to be an unsatisfying answer, but I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, there's definitely going to be some rust there. It had been a long time since she'd fought. She had spent a significant amount of time being like the worst color commentator in the world, and it's tough to come back from that, to being like a good fighter. And then also there's the fact that she was probably the larger and stronger woman in the cage tonight. And so as the rounds went along, she was going to start rolling downhill a little bit, where Montaño, even if not drained by the flyweight weight cut that she used to try to subject herself to, was having to kind of carry the weight of a larger woman and was probably getting tired faster.
Yeah, I can see it. So moving forward, what do you think? I mean, obviously, I don't want to say that you're dismissive of Nicco Montaño. I mean, obviously, we know what the women's divisions are, right? Mm-hmm. And they're so thin. There's not that many. I mean, there's a lot of women out there that are wanting to fight, but not so much that you're just overwhelmed with the amount of women on your roster. So, switching weight classes can reinvigorate your career when you're a woman fighter. So moving forward for these two girls, are they sort of passing each other on the elevator, on the ladder, one going down, one going up? Or do you think that they're both going to be kind of near the top? Do you think this is the beginning of a run for Peña? Or do you think that 2 years cost her maybe her prime?
Well, I don't want to like buy into like this like fallacy thinking that we missed Peña's prime, because I mean Peña at her very best maybe she wasn't a top 3 fighter. The problem with Montaño is she's probably better as a fighter at bantamweight than she was at flyweight, but as thin as the women's divisions are, bantamweight is probably the least thin of them. And looking up the top 10 from those two, I don't see a whole lot of people I would favor them to beat. Yeah. Like it's not that I'm down on either of them. If I say that both of them are kind of number 11 through 15 bantamweights, that's better than hundreds of other bantamweights throughout the world. I mean, not everybody is a future champion. These two might just kind of be at their ceiling.
That's true. All right, let's move on to the next fight. Ryan Hall defeated Darren Elkins by unanimous decision. 29-28, 29-28, 30-27. You seem very excited to talk about this fight. So let's talk about it.
I seem excited, but I don't know what to say about it. I watch a lot of fights. I've watched a lot of fights for a long time. I've been surprised and shocked many times. I mean, I can't count the number of times that I've been watching whatever fight it was and jumped out of my seat and said, holy shit, I can't believe that just happened. But it's been a while since I saw a fight that over the entire course of 15 minutes, I found myself going, this fight looks nothing like I expected it to. And it's not just one weird collision, like one weird happenstance. The whole dynamic of this fight does not look anything like I thought it would. Like, if you told me going into this fight that Ryan Hall was going to knock down Darren Elkins 4 or 5 times, I would have asked if they'd allowed him to like bring a bat. It was just the strangest fight. Ryan Hall is kind of my spirit animal. Like I think he is a blast as far as his personality on the mic goes. He is wonderfully dreadful to watch in the cage. Like one of our contributors, Cole Shelton, who has like the all-time like contact listed Rolodex of fighters, asked Ryan Hall like what he thought of the fact that, and this is before the fight, what he thought of the fact that fans in Sacramento might boo his fight, and he literally said, "I don't blame him. I'd boo if I had to watch me for 15 minutes too." Like, how can you not love that guy? I'll sit through 15 minutes of anything for that.
Yeah, I agree. So, all right. So, since this was not the fight you expected, is this kid evolving, or do you think? All right. So let's put him on a scale, right? And on the one end of the scale is Damian Maia, and the other end of the scale is BJ Penn. Where does he fit in between those two? Closer to which one?
He's closer to Maia. He is closer. If your scale is people who were world-class grapplers and adapted their game to MMA to varying degrees, I assume that's kind of what's on your continuum there.
There you go.
He's still closer to Maia. I mean, Maia improved his striking over the course of his career as well. I mean, we had the whole K1 Maia joke from about 2011 to 2014, where he was kind of willing to stand and bang it out on the feet. Ironically, after Nate Marquardt punted him into the third row. But Hall is still closer to that. What I'll say is his weird kind of useless striking game that only ever seemed to serve to set up his Imanari rolls was weirdly effective tonight. Like he landed more often. He landed with power. He landed with power that stunned Darren Elkins. And Darren Elkins is one of the toughest and most rugged guys in the division. It was just completely strange to watch. All
right, let's move on. Jonathan Martinez defeated Liu Pingguan by KO via knee strike. Round 3, what do you got here?
Okay, and I'll warn you in advance, I dropped into the card a little late. This is the first fight that I actually saw the whole thing of. But He looked really good. I remember it was just last year that he came into the UFC on such a short notice fight that I couldn't even find a picture of him with his shirt off for one of my graphics. He had been fighting on such low level local cards that there weren't even any decent high res pictures of him in a cage or in a ring. He dominated Ping-Wan the whole fight. I thought he was well on his way to just kind of winning a ho-hum 30-27 decision, but he was still going after it in the third round and knocked him out. So good going, Jonathan Martinez. You are another up-and-coming guy in a very crowded division.
All right, I'm with you. I hit the card about the same place, so let's just talk about let's just read the last two. Brianna Van Buren defeated Liviana Souza by unanimous decision, 30-27, 30-27, 30-27. Bino Lopez defeated Vince Morales by unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, 29-28. And lastly, just as a piece of housekeeping as far as the card goes, the UFC drew 10,306 fans for a gate of $938,734.17. If you like to do that sort of bookkeeping in your personal life and you keep track of that stuff, the California kid and his team did very well for themselves. Urijah Faber, Josh Emmett, and Andre Fili all took home Performance of the Night bonuses. For their victory, Jonathan Martinez also took home a fourth Performance of the Night. No fight of the night was issued. So, again, we touched on this a second ago. Let's touch on it again as we move into the fun stuff here in a second. What is a big night for Alpha Male, right? I mean, how do they build on this?
Well, I mean, if you're a team, the only way you build on a good night is improving the fighters you have and drawing more fighters to kind of jump over to your camp because they think that's what's hot. Fighters are really susceptible to that. They jump to whatever, team is holding the hot hand at the moment. That has been Team Alpha Male in the past. I mean, was it 2013 or 2014 when Dwayne Ludwig was everybody's coach of the year? They could certainly be that again. It just takes a couple of really hot nights. They've always done a good job, even when they haven't held the hot hand, at kind of being a destination for lower weight fighters.
Do you think that is on the horizon for them? I mean, we got Benavidez, who may or may not be positioning himself for a title shot. I mean, listen, if you're Team Alpha Male, and actually Benavidez is gone, right? He's Extreme Couture. So we got a lot of guys who have been connected with each other, all seeming like, Henry Cejudo has to feel like he's got Zach Morris and Benavidez and AC Slater and Urijah Faber, who are kind of frenemies, who are trying to see who's going to be the next guy to take, Cejudo's like Kelly Kapowski. So I don't know what to make of, if you're Cejudo, do you go for Faber or do you go for Benavidez?
That's a really interesting question, honestly. I mean, Cejudo he's a big game hunter. He's never really gone out for the easy paydays. He wants to fight the best guys. He wants to prove that he is the best guy. That's I mean, as weird and cringy as he is, the endearing thing about him is he has always just wanted, he believes he's the best fighter in the world, and he wants to prove to you that he is. And it's easy to get behind that, even if he's a weird cat. Having said that, I mean, I'm sure he wants it back with Benavidez, but there's a lot of prestige to taking down Urijah Faber, and it would probably be a bigger payday for him.
All right, the stuff everybody's been waiting for, Ben. Here comes the fun stuff. Let's start with trending up, trending down. Tell me who you think is trending up after tonight, and who's trending down.
Jermaine Randamie is trending up. I mean, even if that fight had not been stopped when it was, and Aspen Ladd came back and won a 29-28 decision, by winning the second and third rounds, I would still say Randamie's stock is up, because she came out and she completely busted the UFC's kind of hot new thing at bantamweight right in the chops, and. That's the thing that shows where she stands. It tells us a little bit about where Ladd stands. Again, whether the fight was stopped or not, that was not a good look for her. So yeah, her stock is absolutely up. Trending down, that's going to be Aspen Ladd. Aspen looked like death warmed over on the scale for not the first time. she was physically shaking and trembling on the scale in her last fight, which, what was that, the Avenger fight? I can't remember which one, but it was another one where she had to be physically helped on and off the scale and like looked like she was going to fall down. It's not a sustainable thing long term. I mean, she's either going to need to seriously retool her nutrition and training regimen or move up to featherweight. And the ironic thing is, if she'd moved up to featherweight a year ago, she probably would have already had a title shot by now, just because that division is so dead. But her stock has to be down a little bit. She looked terrible. She got knocked out really quickly. So that's 1 up, 1 down for me. How many should I give?
That's good. Well,
right.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think that is there any point in the UFC having had these girls fight at 145? Is it just because they want ultimately to sort of send Aspen Ladd Amanda Nunes's way? Or, I mean, like you said, if she's having trouble making weight anyway, and Randamie is the previous champion at 145 pounds, why not just have them fight at 145 pounds?
For all I know, they might have preferred that, and the UFC actually is not really quick to force people to change weight classes until they have a demonstrated, like repeated failure to make weight. I mean, you think of some of these cats and how many times they let them miss weight before they force them to move. Like, your Kelvin Gastelums. I mean, they're still letting like Charles de Bronx fight at featherweight if he wants to. You know what I mean? Like, I think they may have preferred that this fight take place at 145 for all I know, but I don't think they would have forced it. And I'm sure that Aspen Ladd, being the kind of like confident go-getter she is dead sure every time that she's going to make 135.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, that seems to be the place where you might get yourself in trouble if you're the UFC, starting to tell people what weight they should be going to, and that does seem like it's kind of a sticky situation. All right, for me, trending up, I have Josh Emmett. I think that he is as close to the title shot as he's ever going to be if he plays his cards right. Now is the time, and I really don't want to compare him to Jorge Masvidal, but I will compare him to Jorge Masvidal in this way. And the reason why I don't want to compare him to Jorge Masvidal is because I think Jorge Masvidal actually has the roadmap or the blueprint, if you will, if I'm foreshadowing something I might be writing for Sherdog soon. I think Jorge Masvidal might have the blueprint to the title shot. He can market himself. He kind of has the reality of who he is that draws fans. I don't know if Emmett quite has that, but he's as close as he's ever been, and now's the time to sort of just figure it out. So I have him trending up. Trending down, I have Nicco Montaño. I think that when you are someone who has had problems in the past with your promotion, if you start shuffling or you start having some tough nights, they will not be forgiving when it comes to how they deal with you moving forward. And unfortunately, I don't want to say the UFC necessarily plays favorites. I don't want to say they don't either, but I don't want to say they do play favorites. But if you're not in their good graces and you don't necessarily do what they want and you give them some pushback, 4-3 ain't the record to have. So she really needs to figure out a way to sort of right this ship and, figure out, or she's going to be, buying a ticket to Cokerville before you know it. All right, let's move on to Not For Nothing. I got a bunch because, I don't know, tonight was a weird night where I just for some reason have a bunch of Not For Nothings. All right, so first up for me, let's talk about, we touched on it already, but I'll hit it again. Not for nothing, but I get staggering a card, but damn, UFC, who are you trying to push? Like, I can't tell who you want us to care about based on card placement. I don't know if you want this person to, next thing they're going to go here or there. You're telling me nothing. All right, number 2, not for nothing, but if you get into the UFC Hall of Fame because of a fight, are you really a Hall of Famer? I'm talking to you, Clay Guida. I get the victory lap. I know you're having fun. And honestly, I like you. But you're not wearing the same jacket that Urijah Faber is. You're not wearing the same jacket that BJ Penn is. Yeah.
He's wearing the same jacket that Stephan Bonnar is.
He's wearing the same jacket Stephan Bonnar is. There you go. Not for nothing, but is this a fight card or a goddamn track meet? Jesus Christ. I'm all for pace. But can I have 2 minutes to think about the fight I just watched before I'm watching the next walkout? I mean, please, can you give me a second? I mean, listen, I'm from the old school. I am not a young man. I remember when I had like 3 weeks to think about a card. I don't even have 3 seconds to think about a fight anymore. I get it, man, but I mean, do we all have ADD? Can I just look at a fight and go, wow, that was cool? Maybe I'd like to have some thoughts about, oh, here comes the next guy. All right, what's his walkout music? And lastly, not for nothing, this has completely been out of nowhere, but not for nothing, Wellington Turman looks like if Nate Diaz and CB Dollaway had a kid. I mean, that doesn't mean shit. I just figured I would say it.
I'm laughing without even looking. I'll probably laugh again later when I pull up the picture side by side.
When you see a picture of him, yeah. There's something about...
You've thrown up a win-win, because even if I disagree, I'm still going to laugh when I look.
So, yeah, Wellington Turman is the love child of Nate Diaz and CB Dollaway. You're up.
I don't have anything for not for nothing, except I really wanted some Raising Cane's by the end of this thing, because they showed me that Raising Cane's commercial like 5 times. I am damn hungry.
Well, listen, not for nothing, but there's some positive marketing. All right, shocker of the night. Let's move on to our shocker of the night. For me, I got to be honest with you. My shocker of the night is, it's going to sound weird, but, you know, these hometown fighters, they don't always do so great. You know, I go to all the Phoenix cards. Obviously, I live in Phoenix. And we don't always do the best. Not everybody does the best at home. And I mean, was it a clean sweep for Alpha Male? It was damn near it. I mean, all the relevant guys won. Mm-hmm. My shocker of the night was the Team Alpha Male did so well.
My shocker of the night was the entire Ryan Hall fight. Ryan Hall versus Elkins was like a 15-minute like electrocution for me with 1-minute breaks between the rounds. I'm still reeling from that because it is one of the stranger fights that I've watched play out in real time as compared to my expectations. That's kind of the most shocking thing for me. And I was shocked by Josh Emmett, who normally is kind of a dry dude on the mic, cutting the perfect face promo after his fight. Like offering to buy a drink for 10,000 people, you know, plus me, that'll get me in your corner every time, even if you know nobody's going to take you up on it.
I know, you got to think maybe the guy knew he was getting that performance bonus. He's like, I don't know that I want to blow the performance bonus on buying a bunch of strangers drinks, but, you know, to each his own. Yeah, I also wouldn't get the same tattoos Josh Emmett has. So, I mean, obviously we make different decisions. So, listen, it was just, it's funny. You say that later on you're going to have the moment where you look at Wellington Turman and you have that moment. My moment is just you watching I wish I could have watched you watching the Ryan Hall fight, because the face that I got from you, the way you describe it is just kind of like this. Like, you're just sitting there going, huh, okay. All right, okay. A lot of like okays and all rights from you, Ben.
Well,
I feel like that's what you did.
Okay, all right, because I felt like he was like possessed by 2 different spirits, and one spirit was of like a 76-year-old woman walking around the mall for fitness,
right?
Like at 8:30 in the morning, and the other one was Bruce Lee. How is this happening? Like, just from like one 15-second block to the next, he would be 2 completely different fighters.
That's your nature. That's your nature versus nurture argument. It's like he was born to Bruce Lee, but he was raised by a 78-year-old woman who walks around,
exactly.
Has all her coupons out. There you go. It's nature versus nurture. Simple. All right, let's go to From the Notebook. From the Notebook is typically where we just talk about, stuff that happened on the telecast or whatever. Listen, I'm very critical of some of these. I know people are just like, they don't care about commentary, or, dude, call me a casual, call me what you will, but Goldie and Rogan, to me, for all Goldie's foibles, for all the missed things that he said, they just had a chemistry and they just worked. And to me, it's like if Michael Bisping and Brendan Fitzgerald were watching this fight recorded in 2 different studios on tape delay. And they were watching it at different time. Like they're like, okay, guys, hit play now. And then Fitzgerald hit it right away, and Bisping waited 10 seconds. And it's like, these guys could not be, they're like 2 guys sitting at a bus stop, Ben. It's like they don't even know each other. It's like, do you guys talk before this card? So that aside. So a couple of mine were this. Brendan Fitzgerald saying Andre Fili getting this thing lit is about as off-brand a move as Brendan Fitzgerald using the word lit is very off-brand.
Stop. Yeah, just don't do that.
Let's talk about Mike Beltran. Mike Beltran takes no shit from anyone. He was just like, with those eye pokes, All right, was it the eye pokes or the low blows? I think it was the low blows. He was just like not having it. And that's what you want out of a ref. Now let's move to Herb Dean. Herb Dean had the best line of the night for me as a ref. He said, "Don't bring me into this fight." I said,
Yes.
that's the best way you can put it. You don't want me to get involved in this fight. I love it. All right, I keep saying this, and listen, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it with a huge caveat. When I first got into the MMA media game, one of the people that was nice enough, because I've been doing this Sunday morning Cornerman brand for a minute, one of the first people that I interviewed who was nice enough to give me time was Trevor Whitman. Okay? With that being said, so I'm going to show you my bias right out front. With that being said, I need more energy from him, Ben. I need it. The guy's in the corner during fights. So if you're going to have that role, I don't need Harold Letterman. I don't need him to go, "Okay, Brendan, I don't need all that."
Rest
but
in peace,
I at
Harold.
least need him to bring me in the corner. I think he's so caught up in being analytical. And this is the thing. He has it in him. He gave the best induction speech at the Hall of Fame. And, you see him in the corner. The guy's amazing. Amazing at what he does. I just need a little bit more energy. And lastly, Marvin Vettori's coach in between the second and third round told him that he won the first and second round. I'm only bringing this up because I want to know your thoughts on cornermen telling fighters they either are losing the fight or winning the fight, or they've won this round or won that round. What are your thoughts on that? Just as Whitman loved it. Bisping wasn't crazy about it. What do you think?
I'm not surprised in either case on their takes on it. As an outside observer, I am not comfortable judging corners on what they say there, even when it seems like complete bunk to me, for the simple reason that they are talking to somebody that they have spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours with, and if they're competent at all, they know what that person needs to hear. Think of the many different versions of Greg Jackson that have talked to his different fighters in the corner. Think of how he talked to George St. Pierre versus how he talked to Carlos Condit or Leonard Garcia in the corner. He's a master at telling fighters what they need to know. I'm not surprised that Bisping didn't love it, because Bisping got to his highest heights under the tutelage of, his name just completely slipped my mind.
Jason Perillo.
Thank you. Who is a very straight shooter in the corner. Perillo isn't going to tell you won the first two rounds if you lost the first two rounds. So I'm not surprised in either case, but in either case, I'm not going to second guess him on that. They're telling their fighter what they think he needs to know or she needs to know in order to perform the way they need to in the round ahead of them. And there's a relationship of trust there that I'm not privy to.
That's true. And it kind of makes me think of that. One of it was it when someone, God, this name is really escaping me. Female fighter, they were saying that they should have thrown in the towel for her, but they didn't. And
yes, Raquel Pennington against Nunes just last year.
There you go. And they were talking about the relationship between them. And what's funny, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, and it won't take long, but I think it's crazy that we say when it's time to throw in a towel, well, no one knows this person like their corner does, and they're the best indication of whether or not they should. I completely agree with that. Well, then why the hell do we argue with them when they say that the person can come back to fight? When they're like, hey, we think they're washed up, we think they should retire, we think they're done, and their corner and them say, yeah, they still got some fight and lift in them. Why do we give them the pass when it comes to throwing in a towel, but not when it comes to who can more? Like, for me to sit here and tell you that I don't think who's a guy that should probably hang? Let's just say BJ Penn, because he's easy. For me to say that I don't think BJ Penn should fight anymore, and it's based strictly on in the cage. I don't know what that guy's training regimen's like. I don't know what his cognitive state is anymore. He's trying to get mount on a bouncer at a nightclub. So my guess is that his cognitive isn't. I'm guessing there's some CTE at place if he's trying to get mount on a bouncer in a Hawaiian nightclub. That's neither here nor there. But I guess just my mini tangent is if we're gonna let them decide who throws in the towel and when it's thrown in, let them make all the decisions. Let them decide when it's time to hang them up.
The reason I disagree there is that, when Vettori's coach is telling him, hey, you won the first and the second round, that's based on like some psychology and some relationship of trust that, again, I may not fully understand. When I see Raquel Pennington, getting trundled back out for the last round of that fight, I don't need to know the relationship in the gym. I can see how done she is. That's something that's like empirically observable to like all the hundreds of thousands or millions of people watching it. And it's more to do directly with their safety. Like, it's not like the coach was telling Vettori what to say or telling Vettori what he needed to hear tonight so that he could go out and survive in a fight that he was getting slaughtered in. He was just trying to get him to perform a certain way.
That makes sense. All right, let's move on to what is Keith's favorite, because that's just the kind of guy Keith is. Let's move on to It Might Be Over. This segment's had about 8 different names. It'll probably be different next week. Who do you think it might be over for? Is there anybody that either needs to hang him up or just maybe needs to leave the promotion, someone should be cut? It's a very morbid segment in a way. But what do you think, Ben? Whose time's up maybe in the UFC?
Nobody that fought tonight. Like, this was not a depressing card in that way. This card had, for as kind of dull as it was, had a lot of fighters showing that either they're on their way up or they're back. Randamie and Faber are both fighters who are back after a long layoff for various reasons and looked good in their own way. Even among the losing fighters, there's nobody that needs to hang up entirely. And I don't even know if there's anybody that's going to get cut from the UFC completely off of tonight's performance. I mean, there are a couple of fighters where we might have seen their ceiling. Like, I don't know if Darren Elkins will ever be ranked higher than he is right now. Maybe Mirsad Bektic is not as great as we thought he was. Because 3 years ago, I would have said this guy's a future at least title challenger, and now I don't know anymore. But, I mean, that's the most depressing thing from the card is that maybe, some people aren't as great as I thought they might be one day. That's it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, obviously, had Faber lost, we'd be having a different conversation. Montaño was kind of in there a little bit. So, but like you said, even guys that got knocked out, like Moraes, you wouldn't want. It's not the end for him. Bektic, you mentioned. Elkins, you mentioned. It's not really the end for anybody, even people that got put on highlight reels tonight. So, all right, let's move on to the last thing that we need to get settled here as far as segments go, and that is the grade. Now, before I ask you for a grade for this card, I want to get your philosophy on grading cards in this way. Do you think you should grade a ESPN Plus or ESPN specific card differently than a pay-per-view card, differently than whatever?
Absolutely. It has to be in relation to expectations. I mean, I see a lot of local MMA around here, and I will go to a card that has not a single future UFC or Bellator fighter on it and have a complete blast and call that evening an A+. And I will watch one of the most anticipated pay-per-views of the year and call it a B+, because it has to be in relation to expectations. So even among UFC cards, there's a continuum, because there are some that they load and there are some that they're just trundling out a card because they've got 600 fighters that they owe a fight to this year.
All right, talk to me then about how you left this evening.
I would give this a card, even in relation to what it is and what it should be, a C-. It wasn't completely miserable. There were some moments of amusement. We learned a few things. That's always important. I mean, we got to learn things. We're here to figure out who the best fighters are in every division. We did have some fights that gave us movement that way. There were some fantastic finishes that should have gone a few seconds longer, and there were some moments of hilarity. So, yeah, C-, not great, not terrible.
I'm with you. Sometimes, and I'm a fight fan as much as anybody, but sometimes I'll view a card based on if I had something, if I wasn't doing a podcast tonight, what could pull me away from this card? Swimming in the pool with my kid, going to a movie. What could pull me away from this card? And there are a few things that could have pulled me away from this card, and I would have not felt like I missed something. Do you know what I mean? Had I DVR'd it or had I watched it later, I wouldn't have felt like, oh man, I had to see this card live. Their stakes weren't that high. Now, in fairness, when Urijah Faber fights, you want to see it live. I mean, whether he got knocked out or he had the performance he had tonight, I did want to see that live. So I would say I'm right there with you. I'd give it a C. All right, let's do, before we let you go, this is just our opportunity to talk about a few things around the entire MMA landscape. What are your thoughts on Bellator last night? How'd you feel about it?
I actually wrote the recap for Sherdog.com for the Bellator card last night. I was just filling in because we're short a person this week. But, I mean, if you thought tonight's thing was like on a conveyor belt, they had a 12... Well, I mean, some of them got made into post limits, but basically it was a 16-fight card, and it was just whipping by. They didn't even have walkouts. They basically had an on-deck circle. Like, no post-fight interviews for the most part, no walkouts, just bang, 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 bang. It was insane, especially as I'm like trying to type up something that we ideally want on the front page like 10 minutes after the last fight ends. Good to see Leslie Smith back in a cage doing her thing. Good to see Ed Ruth get back on track. I think he is still a future fixture at top 10 in the top 10 in the welterweight division. So interesting card with a lot of filler on it.
Real quick, and you can answer this as quickly as you want to. Where do you think Bellator's at right now? What's the state of Bellator? Are they? I mean, they're not at their peak, right? They've peaked previously. So are they on the way back up? Are they near their peak? How do you see them, and where do you see them?
I mean, Bellator might have fallen off a little bit from their peak, but it's peak in terms of what? In terms of number of eyeballs they've had on them, in terms of like name prestige fighters, or in terms of actually cranking out high level competition? Because they're still doing the same thing they always have. I mean, they always top their cards by disgustingly overpaying like UFC retreads who are usually over the age of 40. Their heavyweight Grand Prix that just finished up, 5 of the fighters were former UFC fighters and 6 of them were over 40 by the time it ended. It was a complete shit show. But at the same time, their welterweight division is dynamite. And they do a very good job at bringing in high-level prospects from other component disciplines. Obviously they've signed a ton of high-level wrestlers. Jordan Young won again last night, or signing high-level karate fighters and bringing them along in a smart fashion. That's something they've always been really good at. And in that sense, they're still the same Bellator as ever. Terrible stuff at the top, bringing along prospects really smartly, like lower down on the card.
I feel like Bader and McDonald were a little closer to their prime when they came over. Did you think that was going to have a bigger impact than it ended up having? Because I did. I thought it was going to have a way bigger impact. I didn't think they were going to be like the Pied Piper, and now all of a sudden the UFC is going to be like overpaying guys to stay. But I thought there'd be more guys in Bellator than there actually are.
I hoped it would have a bigger effect. I mean, it's been hampered by the fact that McDonald has had mixed results. I mean, usually it's somebody coming from another promotion to the UFC with a lot of hype that doesn't pan out. So for Rory McDonald, who was maybe a top 3 or 4 welterweight in the UFC, when he left to go out there and have such mixed results, that's honestly been almost a win for Bellator in a competitive sense. Mousasi, I kind of expected and hoped he would do better, but he's definitely had mixed results as well. So, I mean, I can understand why there isn't as much of a Pied Piper thing, but I had hoped it would be more of that effect.
Let's move on to the PFL. I'm going to ask you a question. It's going to be very loaded, and I'm going to pull this from this podcast and put it all over social media if you give me the response that I want, because I'm going to kind of have you endorse something for me here. Magomed Karamov. It's too much, Ben. It's too much for these announcers to say. Can we just call this guy M2K and be done with it? Let's just call him M2K.
Yes, somebody needs to get directly in touch with him or his management and just clear it and say, we're going to call you M2K from now on. And I think that would absolutely be the best thing to do. I
mean, if I had to hear the announcers, and another side note, Sean O'Connell, you're such a good announcer that it's you in the booth with it's 3 fighters. Props to Sean O'Connell. I mean, he really turned himself into a good little broadcaster. I mean, nobody's mistaken him for John Anik, but he's all right, man. He's good.
He's right up there with the best fighters turned announcers that we've ever seen. He's right up there with kind of like Brian Stan.
He took it seriously, and he's turned himself into a good announcer. That aside, so I got your endorsement on M2K. Let's talk about the card itself real quickly. Magomed M2K. See, I almost broke my own goddamn rule. M2K defeated Chris Curtis. Kayla Harrison defeated Morgan Fryer. Joao Deferino defeated Bon Velikovic. John Howard, surprisingly to some, defeated Ray Cooper. David Michaud picked up a win. Larissa Pacheco picked up a win. This was a pretty good card, I thought. I mean, there's some things happening. Where do you stand on PFL? Because obviously we've never talked about it.
Okay, I love the concept of PFL. I completely adored their whole season last year. I mean, their playoffs were terrible. Their regular season was amazing. And it was all down to the way they structured it. I mean, and they're still doing it this year. The way they have the standings set to reward people for finishes and reward people for early finishes made their regular season events last year have just kind of this dynamite energy to them, like where any crazy thing might happen at any moment in a way that I haven't really felt since the first season or two of Bellator. Like, I loved all their events last season. I've loved it so far this season. And then their playoffs were a nightmare because they were 2-round events where if it went to a draw, which a lot of 2-round fights will, their rules made it that the person who won the first round won the fight. So after the first round, a lot of people were motivated to stall, and basically just kind of ride out the fight. That was the problem with PFL. I have no indication that that's going to change this season. So I'm expecting their playoffs to be a shit show, but the events so far have been great. Their problem is they're having people drop out, miss weight, left and right. They've lost a couple of their biggest names already, but their biggest of biggest names, the champions from last season, and of course Kayla Harrison, are kind of trudging along. Ray Cooper is making himself. He's on track to be one of the biggest MMA flashes in the pan of all time. So I hope that's not where he ends up.
Speaking of Kayla Harrison, I'm 100% spacing on the girl. Who's the girl that she had some problems with? The top 2 fighters in her division. Her and the other one. The number 1 ranked fighter. God, what is her name?
Pacheco?
No, she fought Pacheco, the other lady. She didn't fight. She was just there. Sarah Kaufman, maybe?
Oh, sorry. In their division.
Yeah, in Kayla's division, it's her and Sarah Kaufman are the top 2 fighters, right?
Yes, it's her and Kaufman, who is a lifelong bantamweight.
They got a nice little feud budding. There's a little bit of something under the surface there that I like.
Which is it's interesting, and that's good because PFL needs that. They need, Kayla Harrison is their golden goose. They need to sell us on the possibility that she might lose, because if you're trying to sell us an undefeated fighter, there's only 2 things you can sell us: either they do spectacular things in beating their opponents, or they might actually lose this time.
I think they have a long-term plan with her, and the secret to it is Cyborg. But I think that if they can get Cyborg away from the UFC, the first season becomes, can Kayla Harrison fight MMA? The second season becomes her feud with Sarah Kaufman. And then the third season becomes Cyborg. I think that's the progression to keep this thing going for a while. Now, I'm going to, again, throw something at you that's completely loaded. And if you support it, I'll be pulling this from the podcast, putting it all over social media so that you're throwing your support behind me. So get ready.
Straighten my hat. All right, we're good.
I think Gilbert Melendez should go to the PFL. Here's why. He cannot compete in the UFC any longer. He just doesn't have it. He doesn't have it to compete in the UFC any longer. And the only way that he can leave the UFC and keep his job at ESPN is to go to the PFL. And he can win $1 million.
I'd be fine with that. Honestly, he could compete with a lot of those guys.
Do you think he would do it?
No.
Tell me why.
Well, one, I don't know what his contract status is with the UFC, but I know that he came in highly paid.
Yeah.
And the UFC has not gotten any kind of fair value out of him, either in terms of buzz or in terms of actual competitive, legitimacy. Like, he's just he's crashed. And I hesitate to throw accusations out to the wind. But he is on the short list of fighters who have declined most quickly after the advent of USADA in the UFC. Yeah. And I don't know if they're related, but I know that they have happened at the same time. So I don't know. I don't think he'd go to PFL. I think he'd probably definitely interesting. I don't think he's a completely shot fighter, but he's not able to fight the type of people the UFC needs to match him with to justify his paychecks.
Ben, this is an entirely different conversation, and we'll hit these last 2 and we'll get out of here because this is, we've been going for a bit. But this is what separates the NBA from MMA. The NBA is separate from everything else. But one of the things the NBA does better than anybody else is I think that all the owners kind of understand that some movement and getting your league talked about, like, that matters. Like, they understand. Like, does the OKC Thunder really want to get rid of Paul George and Russell Westbrook? No. But once they knew George was going, they were like, well, let's get something for Russell. And let's put him somewhere that's interesting. They could have traded him any number of places. They chose to put him in Houston with James Harden, who he's played with before. And it's just, so, I mean, the most interesting thing MMA's done in a while is trading Ben Askren for Demetrius Johnson.
Yep.
And the PFL. And, like, all these interesting things. I think that if you're the UFC, you have to look, and I've been saying this for a while, and this is my last bit, and we'll get out of the PFL thing. The PFL is primed to be a feeder league for the UFC. They are on the same network. Here's what they should do, and I've been saying this forever. If you win the $1 million, you have the option to go to the UFC. 100%. Now, I understand why that is not in the best interest of the PFL. Your champion is leaving after you've just given him $1 million. But I just think that they need to get in. If I'm ESPN, I'm sitting these two guys down. I'm sitting Dana White and Ray Sefo down and going, how can you guys work in conjunction with each other? What can we do? Let's figure it out. Because they're on the same network. And casuals don't know the difference. If you're watching PFL, guess what you see? You see Unlocking Victory with Dominic Cruz and Gilbert Melendez, and you don't know one from the other. It's all intertwined. If you're watching PFL, they're doing commercials for the UFC. So it's all MMA to casuals. They need to figure out a way to work together, man. They got to get this thing right. All right. Lastly, well, not lastly, because you have something you want to talk about, but Ken Shamrock and all this bare knuckle business. Make heads or tails of it for me. I can't get my head around it.
Okay, I will try to knock this down quickly. I'm not a fan of bare knuckle boxing as currently constituted. I can't wait for the moment that it disappears from MMA radar to the point that I no longer feel compelled to comment on it, either personally or, kind of as one of the editors at Sherdog. Here's the thing. It was a cool idea. And if you talk to people a year or two ago that were into this little niche thing, they would tell you, bare knuckle boxing, it's different from mainstream boxing. It's a martial art into itself. These guys, they have different skill sets. There's more body work. There's better defense. Nobody just goes headhunting because there's always a chance you'll break your hands, which is cool. But as soon as MMA got a hold of it and this sport became flooded with current or former MMA fighters, who in many cases were not great strikers even by MMA standards, it kind of ruined everything that bare knuckle boxing was supposed to be. And now it's just, watching Leonard Garcia and Artem Lobov just bust people up in a format where it's even easier to cut somebody and just make like a gory, bloody mess out of it. So I think it kind of sucks. I'm not surprised that Ken Shamrock is getting his hands into it. If he's really fighting Mark Coleman, that's insane, because I still remember the GoFundMe for Mark Coleman's hip replacements that I think MMA Elite Apparel picked up. So if he's stepping into any kind of combat sport, that's terrifying. But by all means, cash those checks as long as I don't have to watch it.
Bare knuckle's weird for me because they kind of do this thing where they talk about the history of it, and that's fine, but that's like talking about the history of racing based on like auto car racing based on older cars, and all of a sudden we're just going to start driving them again. It's like the reason why bare knuckle boxing existed was an absence of things. And once the sport evolved into like having gloves and having sanctioning and having all this other, it became the peak of boxing was not bare knuckle boxing. It was the origin of boxing. So for me, it's like I don't quite get the play, and you're also not completely bare knuckled. So it's kind of an odd thing in and of it. And I'm not saying they should be. I'm just saying that's the way it was in this history. So yeah, it's weird for me. I wish that we could figure out a way that guys like Ken Shamrock would not have to do stuff like this. But, that's them, and that's them taking financial responsibility for themselves, and that's got nothing to do with the rest of us. All right, you put on here UFC on ESPN promos hitting you right in the heart. Tell me.
They're hitting me right in the heart because I'll be there covering it live in San Antonio for the site, along with my compadre Patrick O'Shea. So that's why it's hitting me in the heart, because like they're talking about fights that I'm gonna get to see from like press row, but it's almost a compare and contrast between tonight and a week from now in terms of the two kinds of free UFC card you can have. Like this card, I mean, I haven't counted yet, but if you count the number of top 15 fighters on next week's card versus tonight's card, I have the feeling it will be a grotesque like imbalance in favor of the San Antonio card. Dos Anjos versus Edwards at the top of the card is like a really, really insanely good fight to me. And, you know, as someone who is a Houston native and bumps into Juan Adams, you know, at local shows, in fact, at the local show where he got his start in the sport, getting to see him fight Greg Hardy in Texas is just going to be one of the more satisfying moments of my life as a fan. I will step out of media mode and just kind of enjoy that one as a fan.
So I think you're kind of leaning in a certain direction, but I'm just going to go ahead and flat out ask you, who's in for a bigger surprise on that night, Greg Hardy or Juan Adams?
If Greg Hardy like expects to like look at the ceiling lights and ask what city he's in, then Juan Adams is in for a bigger surprise. In any other case, I think Hardy's in for a bigger surprise. Juan Adams is so much better than anybody Hardy has ever fought that I have the feeling that this is going to be brutal. Greg Hardy is an A-plus athlete. I mean, he was a great athlete even by NFL defensive end standards. He was a plus athlete even by NFL standards. He is an A-plus athlete who doesn't really know how to fight. Juan Adams is a B-plus athlete who does. It's going to be a slaughter.
All right, let's get out of here on this. Talk about the site. Talk about what you got going on. Talk about what the site's got going on. Let everybody know where they can follow you, where they can read the stuff. What's going on?
My name is Ben. I am a senior editor at Sherdog.com. You can find all my work just by going to Sherdog.com, opening the little features tab, and I'm on the little drop-down menu. I write a column called Minute by Minute where I kind of just throw snark and jokes and Photoshop memes at whatever weird shit happens on the card. And this weekend between Bellator and the UFC has given me ample material. So that'll be up tomorrow and should be a lot of fun. And yeah, I mean, if you're watching anything on Sherdog at UFC on ESPN4 next weekend, I'll be on the ground in San Antonio. And certainly if you're there in San Antonio, hit me up. I'm at Benjamin Duffy on Twitter, and I would love to let you buy me a drink, even if you're not Josh Emmett.
All right, guys, there you have it. As always, I can be followed at SM Cornerman. We can be heard on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. The Cage Side Pods is still in existence for all my workshopped, fun podcasts I like to do. I can be read nowadays at Sherdog, where I'm coming up with things every day to try and make an impact on that site. And,
very happy to have you on board. I'm
very happy to be there. It's a great site. I will say this publicly, something I've said a lot privately. I felt like you gentlemen should have won MMA Source of the Year last year, and my hope is that we will win it next year. So here's to that. And guys, as always, this has been the Sunday Morning Cornerman, the world's greatest podcast. Tell your mom, tell your friends' moms, tell your mom's friends. Tell everybody about the Sunday Morning Cornerman. And as the great Alexander Gustafsson says, the show is over, guys.